Well, it is great to see everyone on this fine morning. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Proverbs 18:22 tells us, "He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord." Now, we're familiar with this passage. We've heard this passage. Jim gave us a lesson based on this passage a few weeks back. But some people may look at this and say, okay, he who finds a wife finds a good thing. Okay. How do I find a wife? How do I get that good thing? And for the women, they may be asking, well, how do I find a husband? I mean, the world gives us many different ways to go from being single to being married. You have the modern version of dating. There's the older form of courtship. There's online dating. There's arranged marriages. There's all these different ways that people end up going from being single to being married. And people may ask, well, which one's best? How do we go about this? But of course, we don't want to look to the world, do we? We don't want to look at what the world does, because the world is sinful. So we need to look to the Bible to see how to go from being unmarried to married. But here we run up against a little bit of a wall. There's no passage that lays out a direct statement saying, hey, this is how you go about this process of finding a spouse. So we have to examine God's Word to see how to go about that process. So today, we're doing the second part of our Hidden Dangers and Building Skills sermon series. Last week, we talked about the hidden danger of buying into the soulmate idea. And today we're going to be talking about building marriage skills. Now, you may say, wait a minute, you were just talking about finding a spouse, and now you're talking about building marriage skills. Well, the thing about it is, building marriage skills doesn't just start once you're married. It starts way back when you're a little kid, learning how to interact well with others. Life skills are marriage skills. But also, those who are preparing themselves for marriage, who are building marriage skills beforehand, become far more attractive to others who are looking to get married. Now, as I started making a list of concepts to include in this sermon, it became clear we could do a weekend seminar on this and not cover everything. In fact, we've done marriage seminars a number of times throughout the years and not covered everything. So we're going to focus in on three key concepts today. First, we're going to talk about having godly goals. We're then going to talk about understanding covenant commitment. And thirdly, we're going to discuss trusting God while seeking a spouse. Now, more than half the room is sitting here saying, well, I'm already married. Well, here's the thing. Building marriage skills doesn't stop when you get married. You'll be building marriage skills until you pass from this life. And so these things are going to be applicable to you as well. Another large portion of the room might be saying, hey, I'm a preteen, I'm not worried about it. Kids, this pertains to you as well, because it's going to be a few short years until you're looking for a spouse. I know right now you're going, ooh. But you need to be building these skills now so that when the time comes, you're ready. So with that being said, let's jump in and talk about having godly goals. Goals are essential for every aspect of our life, especially when it comes to seeking a spouse. But here's the thing. Worldly people make a list of about superficial attributes that they want in a spouse. We've all heard it, right? Want someone who's this tall and this weight, or makes this many figures, or has this color hair, or whatever it may be. There have been a number of viral videos that have become popular of men and women listing these really unrealistic goals in what they're looking for in a spouse, mainly physical. But godly people should examine God's Word for spiritual attributes to develop in themselves and to look for in a spouse. Because here's the whole thing. Marriage is a two-way street. If you're looking for something particular in a future spouse, well, you need to be making yourself into the person that kind of person will be attracted to. So we have to ask, what are some godly goals? What are some godly attributes that we should be looking for in a spouse and developing in self? Well, we'll first talk about some goals for men to work towards and for women to look for. Because after all, if the men are going to be working towards something godly, well, that's what the women should be looking for. We're going to go to 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 7. Now, you might be thinking, hey, that's the passage about elders. What if I don't want to become an elder? What if I'm not yet going to be an elder? I know. But these goals are godly goals for any man, really any Christian, to strive for. And let's look at this and then we'll make some observations about it. 1 Timothy 3, starting verse 1. It is a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of overseer, it is a fine work he desires to do. An overseer then must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, temperate, prudent, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not addicted to wine or pugnacious. That means basically not someone who's going to start a fight, but gentle, peaceable, free from the love of money. He must be one who manages his own household well, keeping his children under control with all dignity. But if a man does not know how to manage his own household, how will he take care of the church of God? And not a new convert, so that he will not become conceited and fall into the condemnation incurred by the devil. And he must have a good reputation with those outside the church, so that he will not fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. Now that list right there is an excellent set of goals for a man to work toward, to be developing in his life, starting as very young men, because these are things that you work up to. Now, in a practical sense, a man who is working towards those goals, what impact is that going to have on his day-to-day life? Well, this man will be healthy to be around. He's not going to be abusive because he's not pugnacious. He's not a striker, as it says. He's not going to be addicted to wine, so he's not going to come home drunk and beat his wife and family. He's going to be gentle and peaceable, so he's going to be caring about their emotional well-being, and he'll be listening to their needs. He's going to be a healthy person to be around. And men, right there is a great goal for any of us to strive for. We should be people who are healthy to be around, so that those around us, our family, our friends, our children, they're better off for being in our lives. We do not want to be the kind of men that other people need therapy because of. So we should strive to be healthy to be around. But also, this man is going to be a good provider. Now, this section doesn't necessarily talk about his financial well-being, but you look at that, okay, he's got self-control. He's someone who obviously is working towards some pretty lofty goals because he's developing these attributes in his life. So he's going to have a good work ethic. He has a good reputation in the community, so he's going to have good job prospects. He'll be a good provider. He'll also be a good father. Not just because it says that he keeps his household in control with dignity, but you look at those other aspects and he's going to be someone who's gentle with his kids, who is kind, who is able to teach, not just in the church, but able to teach his children. He'll be a good father. He'll also have a good support network, and this is something we often overlook. Support networks are essential. And the American thing says, oh, the man should be a lone wolf who doesn't need anybody. Well, that's not smart. God designed us to need a support network. And there are very often times that there are issues or problems that you don't know how to deal with. And so that support network helps you through those times. And very often in marriage, there might be marriage issues that you don't know how to overcome. And you need that support network to help you through it. So men, develop your support network. And women, look for a man who has a good support network. Now, there's one extra thing I want to mention in reference to women looking for a man who's working towards this. There's this thing that happens where a woman will think that she wants to get a bad boy and reform him. You see it in movies all the time. The girl goes for the bad boy, and then he becomes good because of her. It's nice in a storybook. It's nice in a movie. But in reality, if you go for the bad guy, you'll probably end up needing therapy. Go for the healthy guy. Go for the guy who is not going to cause you mental or physical harm. But now let's talk about the ladies. Let's talk about some goals for women to work toward and for men to look for. Again, there's that duality. The things that the women are working towards, the men should be looking for. We're going to look at 1 Timothy 3:11 and then Proverbs 31. 1 Timothy 3:11 says, "Women must likewise be dignified, not malicious gossips, but temperate, faithful in all things." So the elder and deacon's wives should have these attributes. Now, there's not a lot said about the women here. So let's go to Proverbs 31, which has a lot to say about a godly woman, and do the same thing. We're going to read through it, and then we're going to talk about the implications of what this says. Proverbs 31, starting in verse 10. "An excellent wife who can find? For her worth is far above jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. She looks for wool and flax and works with her hands in delight. She is like a merchant ship. She brings her food from afar. She rises also while it is still night and gives food to her household and portions to her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. From her earnings she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She senses that her gain is good. Her lamp does not go out at night. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hands grasp the spindle. She extends her hand to the poor, and she stretches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of the snow for her household are clothed with scarlet. She makes coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. And she makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies belts to the tradesmen. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she smiles at the future. She opens her mouth in wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household, and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and bless her. Her husband also, and he praises her, saying, "Many daughters have done nobly, but you excel them all." Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her the product of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. Okay, so there's a lot said there, and we're not going to go through every element in detail. But we look at these two passages, 1 Timothy 3:11 and Proverbs 31, and we see some implications. One, this woman will be healthy to be around. Now you notice we have the same goal there, right? Just like the men should be healthy to be around, the women should be healthy to be around. Women, you should be striving to be someone who causes good to others and not harm. You know, that final section in this chapter where it says, it's at the very beginning, it says that she does her husband good and not evil all the days of her life. She's healthy to be around. She's also not a gossip or someone who's going to be spreading slander, like it says over in 1 Timothy 3. So aim to be a person who is healthy to be around. But also she will contribute to the welfare of her family. Now, in our modern world, we hear that and we think, well, she's going to have an outside job. But you look at Proverbs 33, and that's not necessarily what it's talking about. She is working hard to ensure that the family is healthy, that the family is well fed, that they have clothes, that they are functioning as a household. So she will contribute to the welfare of her family. Is there a spelling error? I didn't notice it. My wife's over there giggling, so apparently there's a spelling error. I don't know. Also, she will be a good mother. You know, it mentions there how much care she's taking of her children and her household, but also it says that her children rise up and they bless her. That means that they're recognizing how good their mother was raising them. They're not trying to get away and get therapy. But also, she will have a good support network. And this one, I'm gonna spend some time on this for just a moment. Support networks are so essential. And especially for women, having a good, strong support network is key. And partially because a man who is unhealthy will try to isolate a woman from her support network. So women, develop a support network. Have a good, strong support network. And if someone tries to separate you from that support network, be concerned. And men, it's good if your wife has a really strong support network that is really, really healthy. Do not try to isolate her from her support network. Now, we look at these lists of goals and attributes, and the plain fact of the matter is that no man or woman will have all these attributes perfected at a young age. It's just not possible for someone in their early 20s or even early 30s to have all of these attributes down perfect. So the question becomes, if we're aiming to find a spouse who has these attributes, how can a young adult choose a godly spouse before they are fully mature? Because quite frankly, if we're going to wait till someone has all these attributes, I would not be married yet. Because I'm not fully mature, right? So what do? Well, I have 2 bits of advice that are really just 1 bit of advice. First, take a good long look at the goals you are working toward. Look at yourself first. Examine not just your stated goals, but what goals you're actually putting effort into. Do they match what the Bible teaches? You know, it's one thing to say, I want to be a godly man, but then if you spend all your time being crazy and immature and pursuing unhealthy things, that says something about your own goals. So you need to modify your own goals to match what the Bible says. But then second, take a good long look at the goals your prospective spouse is working towards. Again, not just what they state, but what they're actually working towards. Do they match what the Bible teaches? Again, you might have a guy or a gal who says, yeah, I want to be godly and be involved in the church, but then if they're devoting their time to sinful pursuits or other ungodly things, well, that tells you what they're going to be working toward and where they're going to end up in the future. So we've talked about having godly goals, but now let's talk about understanding covenant commitment. Because this is a huge aspect of that idea of looking for a spouse. What are you getting yourself into? You know, the modern world wants to tell us, hey, just jump into or jump out of marriages as you want to because, you know, they don't mean anything anyways. But we need to understand what the Bible says about covenant commitment. And to do that, we're going to be going to Matthew 19. Now, Matthew 19 is that section that talks about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. And while you're turning there, sadly, too often people examine this section too late. Meaning they only examine it after they've already been divorced. And they go to it as a reference to say, okay, can I be remarried? And to be honest, this section should not exclusively be seen as a guide for who can get remarried. It is a guide for who can get remarried, but it shouldn't be seen exclusively as that. It should be seen as motivation to be careful about who you marry, and as motivation to make the marriage healthy. This is a motivational passage. Why should we make sure we marry a Christian, godly, mature person? This passage tells us. Why should we make sure to make the marriage work and put effort into it, and not just throw it away as soon as things get hard? This passage tells us. So let's study about covenant commitment from Matthew 19. So some Pharisees, they come to Jesus, testing him and asking, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason at all? There's the question. Can we just divorce her for whatever reason we want to? And he answered and said, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? And said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. Okay. First off, we learn here that God created the institution of marriage. And this is important. There's a popular statement that is made today where people say, oh, marriage is just a piece of paper so the government can control you. Or they say, oh, it's just a human thing so that the church could control you, or whatever. No. God created the institution of marriage at the beginning of time itself. We also learn that God joins the two together. Now, again, there's this popular thing that people want to put forth today and say, oh, it only counts if they were married in a church by an ordained minister, then that's the only time they're joined by God. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter. But the Bible tells us something different. The Bible doesn't give us a set marriage ceremony that must be done for God to give his blessing. Instead, what we see is whatever a particular society does to make people married, they're joined together by God. Whether that be the Jewish marriage feast or some other tradition. Now, they respond to him, though. They said to him, verse 7, why then did Moses command to give her a certificate of divorce and send her away? He said to them, because of your hardness of hearts, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning it has not been this way. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. We learn that selfish hard-heartedness will destroy a marriage. He says, because of your hard-heartedness, Moses permitted it. And this is borne out through observation too. If we go into marriage harboring selfish hard-heartedness, that will tear a marriage apart. We need to be others-centered and not self-centered. We also learn from Jesus, though, that marriage should only be ended when your spouse will not stay monogamous. Now, you notice the wording I use there. Monogamous. That is, only having sexual relations with the one person they're married to. Because there's a loophole that some people try to find where they say, oh, my spouse was fantasizing about another person, therefore they were unfaithful in their minds and I can divorce them. No, the Greek wording here is that they had sexual intercourse with someone who was not their spouse. So just having fantasies about someone else does not count. Now, your spouse not staying monogamous doesn't mean you must divorce them. If they can repent and be brought back into a right relationship with God, that's even better. If the marriage can stay together, that's better. But this is the one reason why it is acceptable. We also learn, I need to read that section, we learn, though, that lifelong celibacy may be a consequence if you cannot make the marriage work. Let's read the next few verses. The disciples said to him, if the relationship of the man with his wife is like this, it is better not to marry. He said to them, not all men can accept this statement, but only those to whom it has been given. For there are eunuchs who were born that way from their mother's wombs, and there are eunuchs who are made eunuchs by men. And there are also eunuchs who made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. He who is able to accept this, let him accept it. So, if you can't make the marriage work, the consequence might be lifelong celibacy. Now that right there is motivation. Let's be honest. The relationship between a man and his wife is a pleasurable thing that is great incentive to make that relationship function in a healthy way. If you mess up that relationship, well, you're going to have to be celibate for the rest of your life. We also learn here, though, that some people are better off staying single. If they can't accept Christ's teachings, if they can't make the marriage work, if they're the kind of person who is just always going to be picking fights and causing problems, they may be better off stay single. Now, the lifelong element of the marriage commitment is also seen in 1 Corinthians 7:39. 1 Corinthians 7:39, which says, a wife is bound as long as her husband lives. But if her husband is dead, she is free to be married to whom she wishes only in the Lord. You notice the statements there. that God intends marriage to last for life. When her husband is dead, she is welcome to marry whoever she wants in the Lord. But God intends marriage to last for life. But why? Why does God intend marriage to last for life and not to be something that we jump into and out of every decade? Well, partially because marriage is analogous to Christ's relationship with his church. We see this throughout the New Testament. The marriage is used as an analogy for Christ's relationship with his church. And as Christ is committed to his church, so also we must be fully committed when we enter the covenant of marriage. Committed that this is going to be a lifelong thing. Something we're going to work at, something we're going to strive towards, and not be thrown away, just as Christ is devoted to his church. So we see the importance of having godly goals, and we see some information about covenant commitment. But now let's talk about trusting God while seeking a spouse. Because this is kind of where the rubber meets the road. We can know the facts, a single person can know the facts, but then God doesn't necessarily move on their timeline. They may not be meeting a spouse at the time or place that they want to. And it becomes very tempting to try to go outside of God's plans to seek a spouse. Thinking maybe if I start to act like the world, I could find a spouse easier. Maybe if I go to worldly things, I could find a spouse easier. And so let's talk about trusting God while seeking a spouse. We talked about these passages last week, Matthew 6:33. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Colossians 1:10. So that you will walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, to please him in all respects, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. So any Christian, including those who are single, should seek first God's kingdom and his righteousness. They should be seeking to please him in every respect. They should be seeking to bear fruit in every good work and seeking to increase in the knowledge of God. So my friends, don't compromise your faith or convictions or morals while you're seeking a spouse. It can be tempting. You know, the world says to keep a boyfriend or girlfriend, you need to have sex with them. That's what the world says. That's what they do. Well, don't compromise your faith, convictions, or morals while you're seeking a spouse. The world says, well, hey, you might be able to attract them better if you dress in a less appropriate, less decent manner, a more revealing manner. Well, don't compromise your faith or convictions or morals. Why? Why not play the world's game until you've caught one and then shape up afterwards? You know that old statement of it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. Why not do that? Well, quite frankly, if the relationship starts by you compromising your faith, then it is more likely to end your faith. And I've seen that so many times. And it's sad. You see a Christian young person who they know their Bible, they care about God, they're studying the faith, and then they get into a relationship with someone who's not a Christian. And pretty soon you stop seeing them Wednesday nights or at midweek Bible studies. And pretty soon they stop coming on Sundays or even some Sundays because, well, that's the only day they have off and they want to spend time with their, boyfriend or girlfriend. And then pretty soon you notice that they're talking different and they're dressing different and they're acting different. And pretty soon they're not involved in the church at all. Why? Well, because they conformed to the sinful person rather than the sinful person conforming to Christ. Now, let's talk about a passage that kind of drives home what our mindset should be. Let's go to Romans 12. Romans 12, 1 and 2. And I'm going to be reading from the New King James. Says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. So any Christian, single or married or widowed or divorced, should be presenting their bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is a reasonable service. And, this is important, do not be conformed to the world. Don't go do what the world does, but instead be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So don't be conformed to the world, but instead conform to God. What I want us to think about in this is to serve God to your fullest while you're single. Don't wait till you're married to then start serving Him, but serve Him to your fullest while you are single. Because this is about building habits. You want to build a habit of serving God with everything you are, because your life will change when you get into a relationship. It is inevitable. It will change. So decide now that you will only make godly changes. And part of that is start serving Him to the fullest now, so that as your life changes, you keep those godly habits. But also ask yourself, what changes will facilitate greater service to God? Okay, so you're getting interested in a particular person or trying to attract a spouse. Well, what changes are going to help you serve God more? And what changes are going to end up pushing you away from Him? You have to consider those changes. And then serve God no matter what changes happen. Maybe when you get into a relationship, you'll end up needing to move to a different state. Maybe your prospective spouse lives in a different state. Maybe you're going to move to a different house, and so you might be changing congregations. Maybe there might be job changes that happen. Serve God no matter what changes happen. If you're only serving God because you happen to be right here, right now, and if something changes, you're not going to serve God, you're not actually serving God. Determined to serve Him no matter what changes happen. Now, we've talked about these things, and we've talked about when you find a spouse, right? But still, someone might be saying, I haven't yet found a spouse. How do I find someone to marry? You've been talking about once I get the relationship. How do I get the relationship? Okay, well, let's talk about some things you can do while you're serving God. And you notice the emphasis here. You do these while you're serving God. You're still serving God with all of you who you are, but also while you're doing that, spend time in places where you can interact with godly singles. You could go someplace like Polishing the Pulpit, where they have some singles mingles and different activities where you can interact with godly singles in your age bracket. Go to lectureships. Go to visit sound congregations. Take advantage of volunteer opportunities. Go on mission trips. Go where godly singles might be found. Our congregation is awesome, but we have a relatively limited dating pool. Sorry, we're working on evangelism. But go where godly singles are. Go to those places where you're going to find people who are devoted to God. And widen your circle of friends. Make friends. And this can be intimidating. You know, you might be an introvert. You might be a little bit intimidated by social interactions. And it might be easier. It might be easier just to stick with your little circle of friends and not make new ones. Not to sound harsh, you may not have someone who's a good prospective spouse in your circle of friends. You need to widen that circle of friends so you meet new people. But also make your own opportunities. There's, again, this passive mindset that many people get into, where they say, well, no one does single mingle activities in my area, so I guess I have no opportunities. Well, make your opportunities. If no one is scheduling those single mingle things, you schedule it. Do it. If there's no available and good, godly Christian young people in your age bracket, in your area, make an opportunity by going where they are. Make your own opportunities. Now, this next one, before I put it up there, is going to require a little humility, but it's something we all need to consider. And that is address anything about yourself that might push people away. Take an honest look at yourself and ask, is there something that might be pushing people away from me? And then once you've asked yourself, go find someone who's older than you, that loves you, and is going to be gentle with you, but will tell you honestly, and ask them, is there anything about me that might push people away? And then be ready for their honest answer. Guys, not to pick on my own gender, but I'm going to, sometimes we smell. Maybe they're going to tell you, take a shower every morning, bud. Put on some cologne. Okay, that's a great step. Maybe you don't realize that you've got some obnoxious thing that you do that makes people go like, whoa. Maybe you're always negative and sarcastic, and people say, you know what, I don't need that. Whatever it may be, ask someone you trust who's older than you that will give you an honest but kind answer. Is there anything about me that might push people away? And then change those things. I'm not talking about being false. I'm not talking about putting on a fake front. But, we need to make ourselves appealing to the opposite gender. But also, don't prejudge other singles. Take a chance on getting to know them. It's really easy to get kind of a self-defeating mindset and say, well, that person's not going to be interested in me, and that person I'm not interested, and that person's not going to be interested in me, and I'm not interested in that person, so there's no options. Okay, don't prejudge. You don't want people to do that to you. Go meet them. Go talk to them. Find out if, there might be something there. Through all of it, remember, if you don't change anything, then nothing will change. And again, that sounds really kind of harsh. But if what you're currently doing has not resulted in you finding someone who is good and godly to marry, then there's a good chance that what you're doing will not result in you finding someone who's good and godly to marry. If you don't change anything, then nothing will change. Now, if you're completely happy in the life you have and you don't want anything to change, great, don't change anything. That's good. But also, don't complain about not having a spouse, because things will change. Now, someone at this point might be asking, what about flirt and convert? This is our last section of discussion. What about flirt and convert? The idea there is finding someone who's not a Christian, flirting with them, getting them into a relationship, and then being like, hey, I'm going to make you a Christian. And that sounds good on the surface. Sounds like, hey, this is right, like evangelism, but with the added benefit of a spouse. But there's some things I want you to consider, and then we're going to discuss it some. I'm going to go through a few passages in kind of rapid fire sequence. 2 Corinthians 6:14. Do not be bound together with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness and lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? Now, this doesn't exclusively refer to marriage, but it can be applied to marriage. 1 Corinthians 7:39, a wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives. But if her husband is dead, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. You notice that last bit, only in the Lord. That means within the body of Christ. 1 Corinthians 15:33, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. This is a truism in any relationship. Proverbs 1:10, my son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. Don't go with them. Now, putting those things together, while it's not impossible for a Christian to convert their boyfriend or girlfriend, it has happened. It is a possibility. It's more common for the unbeliever to entice the Christian away from the faith. I would be lying if I said that no Christian has ever converted their boyfriend or girlfriend. That'd be untrue. It has happened. We've seen it happen. But I could point at far more examples of Christians who have been enticed away from the faith by an unbelieving boyfriend or girlfriend. I don't have a specific number for you, but it is far more common for the believer to be enticed away from the faith. Because bad company corrupts good morals. And when you get down to it, it goes back to the idea of goals. What are you aiming for? Are you just aiming for a warm body to exist with you? Or are you looking for a helper to help you face the challenges of life and to get to heaven faithful to God? What are your goals? But someone may say, okay, but what if I've just really hit it off with someone? Okay, well, if you hit it off with a non-believer, keep them in the friend zone. Now I know, the friend zone gets frowned upon these days, but if you hit it off with someone, you're at work or you're at a hobby or whatever, and you get talking to someone and you just seem to hit it off. Okay, be their friend. Absolutely. Be their friend. Be kind to them. But don't start a relationship with them. Seek to convert them before you consider them to be a possible future mate. Convert them before. And I'm going to give two big reasons for this. One, say you don't do this. Say you jump into a relationship with them. And then you introduce the idea of religion. Hey, would you like to study the Bible with me? And they're like, that's dumb. Why would I do that? I have no interest in religion at all. Well, now you've already built up feelings for them. You've already attached your heart to them, as it were. It's much, much harder to back away from the relationship once it's already started. But also, this is a more honest way to go about it. Because imagine for a minute the scenario where you do that, you get in a relationship with someone, and then you're like, hey, you want to study the Bible? And they might be thinking, wait, did you only want to date me so you could convert me? Is this like a Ponzi scheme, a bait and switch? Seek to convert them before you even consider them to be a possible future mate. And then if, God willing, they convert and you're still hitting it off, hey, maybe that'd be cool. But don't jump into a relationship with a non-believer, if at all possible. Now, we could go on and on further. But today, as we've been discussing building marriage skills, we've talked about having godly goals. We've looked at the importance of understanding covenant commitment. And we've discussed trusting God while seeking a spouse. My friends, no matter your current situation, single, married, widowed, divorced, strive to serve the Lord first and foremost. And all of us, this should be our highest priority, serving God. And while serving God, diligently learn and practice the skills that lead to healthy marriage. And again, this is applicable to any of us. Whether you're 13 years old, or whether you're in your 30s, or whether you're in your 60s. Diligently learn and practice the skills that lead to healthy marriages. And we will all be better off for it. Now, as we close the sermon time this morning, if you have a need, maybe you just need the prayers of the congregation, maybe you want to learn more about becoming a Christian, whatever your need may be, please let it be known as Richard leads us